Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take stacks of research, articles, sources, and pull out the key insights to get you well-informed fast. Today, we're looking at a passage that, well, it's puzzled people for ages. Mark chapter 13. A lot of people think these prophecies are, still waiting to happen, or maybe they even contain failed predictions. But our mission in this deep dive is to lay out a pretty fascinating argument, a compelling one, really, that Jesus's words in Mark 13 weren't actually about some far-off global end-time scenario. Instead, maybe they found their complete, very precise historical fulfillment back in 70 CE with the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple. So we'll be digging into historical analysis, looking closely at Mark's gospel itself, which traditionally reflects Peter's teaching. Right?
That's the tradition, yes.
And even Peter's own writings, plus critiques from scholars, thinkers who've really grappled with this passage. The core question is pretty stark. Did Jesus get it wrong? Or have we just missed the context, the timing? This deep dive should give you a shortcut to being really well informed on this, critical bit of scripture. Let's unpack it. So let's set the scene. Mark 13, verses 1 and 2. Picture this. Jesus is leaving the temple, and it's this magnificent structure. Herod the Great started it, 19 to 20 BCE? Still being built, actually, during Jesus' ministry. Some stones over 100 tons. Colossal. The disciples, they're just awestruck.
Understandably so.
Right. They look at it and you can tell they're thinking, this is permanent, this is forever. Their comment kind of sets that up, that assumption.
He does. And Jesus' response, it's just unequivocal. Devastating, really. Mark 13.2. He says, "There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down."
Mm-hmm.
And what's truly amazing is the literal precision. He said this around 3033 CE, and it was fulfilled exactly, wasn't it, when the Romans under Titus destroyed the temple in 70 CE. The historian Josephus, he wrote that the destruction was so total, visitors could hardly even tell where the temple had stood.
Wow.
Yeah, and Jesus is clearly talking about the temple then, the one standing right in front of them, not some future one.
That really sets up the disciples' next questions, doesn't it? Right after this, Mark 13.3 to 4. Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives, looking right back at the temple. He's with his inner circle, Peter, James, John, Andrew. And they ask him two things, really connected. When will this happen? And what's the sign when all this is about to be fulfilled? Mm-hmm. It feels like they're asking about more than just the building falling down. It's like the end of their whole world, their religious world anyway.
I think that's absolutely right. It's not just when does the building fall, it's when does our entire religious and social order collapse? It's a deep anxiety. And Jesus, responding to that, doesn't give a date. He starts with a warning. Mark 13.56. "Take heed lest any man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, 'I am Christ,' and shall deceive many." And history backs this up. The 40s, 50s, 60s CE saw a whole wave of false messiahs popping up.
Exploiting that hope for deliverance from Rome.
Exactly. And notice, the warning is specifically to those four apostles. Take heed lest any man deceive you. It implies they would personally encounter this.
Which points towards it happening soon in their lifetime.
Precisely.
Then he mentions wars and rumors of wars, Mark 13.7, but he says that's not the end yet, just preliminary signs. And our sources confirm that time, 50 to 66 CE, was incredibly tense across the empire, especially Judea, Jewish-Gentile conflicts flaring up everywhere. It sounds like a world on edge.
It certainly was.
Yeah.
And Mark 13.8 gets very specific. 4 signs marking the beginnings of sorrows. That's a powerful image, like birth pangs, international conflicts, regional wars, seismic activity, food shortages, general distress.
Okay.
What's striking looking at the sources isn't just that these things happen, but their convergence, their intensity in that specific region and time frame. It really was like a perfect storm, almost uncannily mirroring Jesus's metaphor.
You mentioned sources.
Yeah, Tacitus, the Roman historian. He notes that periods was marked by disasters, battles, cities destroyed by earthquakes or fire, famines, pestilences. And Josephus gives detailed accounts of Jewish-Gentile conflicts all over the Eastern Mediterranean. So it wasn't just a famine or an earthquake here and there.
It was a cluster.
A definite cluster, suggesting a specific drama unfolding.
That birth pang idea, Archie, you mentioned, it suggests things would get worse, more intense. So for you listening, the point is, these weren't vague predictions. They were specific, observable things leading up to a specific historical event. Now, beyond those big societal signs, Jesus gets personal. He warns the disciples about intense persecution they themselves would face. Mark 13.9-13. He names the sources: Jewish councils, synagogue authorities, even Roman and Herodian officials. It's a grim forecast for them.
It is. And what's remarkable is how closely the book of Acts tracks this. We see the apostles arrested by the Sanhedrin, beaten in synagogues, put on trial before Roman officials like Agrippa and Festus.
It's a direct fulfillment.
Exactly. Prophecy and history lining up.
Then, right in the middle of these warnings about suffering, Jesus says something that seems, well, almost counterintuitive. Mark 13.10. And the gospel must first be published among all nations. That sounds like a huge undertaking. What did all nations, pantata ethne, actually mean back then?
That's a really key question, because our modern idea of all nations isn't what a first-century Jewish person would likely think. For them, it probably meant all the nations where Jews lived in the diaspora. Communities scattered outside Israel, across the Roman Empire, and even beyond.
Okay, so the known world where Jews were.
Pretty much. And we have strong evidence for this. Paul's letter to the Colossians, written maybe 60-62 CE, he says the gospel had already been preached to every creature which is under heaven. Colossians 1.23.
Already, by the early 60s.
According to Paul, yes.
Yeah.
Which suggests an incredibly rapid spread, fulfilling that condition Jesus set.
Jesus also promises them help, right? Divine assistance during persecution. Mark 13.11, the Holy Spirit giving them words. And we certainly see that in Acts, the apostles confounding the authorities. But then there's the really painful part, family betrayal. Mark 13.1-13, widespread hatred. And he says, "He that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved." What does that endure unto the end mean here?
It's significant. In this context, enduring unto the end refers to physical survival. Surviving until the end of that specific age, the one culminating in Jerusalem's destruction in 70 CE.
So saved means physically saved.
In this verse, yes. Physical survival depended on listening to Jesus' warnings, especially the command to flee the city when the sign appeared. It shows how practical his words were meant to be for them.
Which brings us right to that critical sign, the Abomination of Desolation in Mark 13.14. This is the signal for immediate action. And what's fascinating here, as you mentioned, is the common interpretation might be off track compared to what the sources suggest.
That's right. Many people assume the Romans committed this abomination. But the historical context, especially from Josephus, points elsewhere. It seems it was actually committed by Jewish revolutionaries, the Zealots. In late 66 CE, they stormed the temple, made it their military base. Josephus says they committed numerous sacrileges, even came into the sanctuary with polluted feet. That internal defilement by fellow Jews was the abomination.
Not something the Romans did from the outside.
Not initially, no. This was an inside job, so to speak. And that note, let him that readeth understand, it suggests it wasn't obvious to everyone. You needed to understand Daniel's prophecy to recognize it.
And once that sign was seen, the urgency was intense. Mark 13.15-16, don't go back for your coat, don't go down into the house, just flee. You don't say that if the event is thousands of years away.
Exactly. The urgency screams imminence. And this leads directly into the Great Tribulation Jesus describes in Mark 13.19. He calls it affliction, such as was not since the beginning of the creation. That sounds extreme.
It does. How does history match up?
Josephus' account of the siege of Jerusalem is just horrific. The internal fighting between Jewish factions, the starvation so bad it led to cannibalism, the mass crucifixions by the Romans. His descriptions paint a picture of suffering that genuinely sounds unprecedented. It aligns disturbingly well with Jesus' words.
And Jesus mentions the shortened days in Mark 13.20. You said the siege lasted about 3.5 years.
Roughly, yes. From the initial revolt escalating and the abomination in late 66 CE to the final destruction in 70 CE, about 42 months.
Which matches that time, times, and half a time frame from Daniel and Revelation.
That's a remarkable parallel.
And finally, in this section, Mark 13.21-23 warns about false Christs and prophets during the tribulation, promising miraculous deliverance, telling people to stay put.
Right. And Josephus confirms, figures like this did appear. They actively worked against Jesus' warning to flee, trying to keep people in the doomed city. It's like Jesus anticipated every detail, even the counter-propaganda. He truly foretold them all things. Okay, so after describing the tribulation, Jesus uses this dramatic cosmic language, Mark 13.24-25. The sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars of heaven shall fall.
Yeah, that sounds very end-of-the-world-ish.
It does, but we need to understand how this kind of language was used. In the Old Testament, prophets like Isaiah used similar imagery, sun, moon, stars falling, to describe the fall of earthly kingdoms, like Babylon or Edom.
So it's symbolic language for political collapse?
Often, yes. It signifies the downfall of ruling powers, the shaking of established orders. The powers that are in heaven being shaken likely refers to the spiritual forces associated with the old temple system being overthrown. It's a powerful metaphor.
Okay, if that's symbolic, What about the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory in Mark 13.26? Is that also symbolic, or is that a literal return?
This imagery comes straight from Daniel 7. And in that context, it represents the Son of Man approaching the Ancient of Days God to receive dominion and authority. So in Mark 13, it likely signifies Jesus' vindication and enthronement in heaven following the judgment on Jerusalem. His authority is established as the old system collapses.
So it's his coming to God in power, not necessarily his coming back to earth physically at that moment?
Exactly. It's a divine vindication that's demonstrated by its effects on earth, the fall of the temple, the rise of his kingdom rather than a visible descent from the clouds.
And the gathering of the elect in Mark 13.27.
That signifies the completion of the mission, bringing believers from all the nations of the diaspora into the new covenant community. It's a spiritual gathering into his established kingdom, not necessarily a physical airlift.
Then we get the parable of the fig tree. Mark 13.28-29, watch the signs, like watching leaves on a fig tree tell you summer is near. He says, when you see these things, know that he is near, even at the doors. Again, that sounds incredibly imminent.
It does. And then comes perhaps the most debated verse of all, Mark 13.30. Verily I say unto you, that this generation shall not pass till all these things be done.
This generation, that seems pretty clear.
It does. Our sources emphasize that the Greek word, genia, consistently refers to Jesus' contemporaries throughout the New Testament, people living then. Jesus seems to be solemnly promising that the people alive listening to him would see the fulfillment of everything he just described. It sets a clear time frame, about 40 years typically.
And he doubles down in Mark 13.31. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. He's literally staking his credibility on this. If these words failed within that generation,
his entire authority would be undermined. The stakes couldn't be higher.
It's fascinating. He knew the generation, but he also said, Mark 13.32-37, that no one knows the exact day or hour, not even himself.
Right, which reinforces the need for constant watchfulness and readiness within that generation. That call to be alert makes perfect sense if the events were expected relatively soon.
If it was thousands of years away, why the constant be ready now message?
Exactly. The unknown hour fits an imminent expectation, not a far distant one.
Okay, but let's address the elephant in the room. For centuries, many people, including serious scholars and critics, have argued that Jesus' prophecies here simply failed, that the second coming didn't happen in that generation.
Yes, this is a major historical challenge, and we can't ignore it. Take someone like William Barclay, a respected biblical scholar. He looked at Mark 13 and basically said, yes, Jesus seems to say he'll return within that generation. But Barclay concluded that did not, in fact, happen. He was mistaken.
Wow. From a believer.
Yes. He even suggested early Christians might have tweaked Jesus' words later to explain the delay. Then you have outright critics like Bertrand Russell, the atheist philosopher. He pointed to this supposed failed prediction as a key reason not to be a Christian.
He saw it as proof Jesus wasn't divine.
Essentially, yes. And academics like Paula Fredrickson noted that later New Testament writings seem less focused on an imminent apocalypse, suggesting the early church perhaps adjusted its expectations as time went on. And Jewish critics, like Samuel Levine, used Deuteronomy 18. The test of a true prophet is if their predictions come true to argue Jesus failed the test.
Even C.S. Lewis, a staunch defender of the faith, famously called Mark 13.30 the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. He saw the difficulty.
He acknowledged how problematic it appears if you assume the prediction failed.
So, faced with this apparent failure, Christian scholarship developed ways to, well, navigate it. We called them conventional escape routes. Things like redefining generation to mean the Jewish race, or a type of wicked people, or saying only part of the prophecy was fulfilled then.
Right, or inserting a long gap of time, maybe thousands of years, between verse 29 and verse 30, or between the destruction of Jerusalem and the coming. Or just spiritualizing the coming entirely, disconnecting it from 70 CE.
You argue these create problems.
They do. They often require readings that feel unnatural to the flow of the text. Why the urgency if it's millennia away? They risk making Jesus' warnings almost irrelevant to the people. He was actually speaking to Peter, James, John, and Andrew. It forces the text, doesn't it?
It feels like trying to make it fit a preconceived idea rather than letting the text speak in its own context.
That's a fair way to put it. It avoids the embarrassment, but perhaps at the cost of the plain meaning and the historical context. So the question becomes, is there a way to read it that honors the text and the history?
Okay, let's tackle that idea of adjustment or delay, especially concerning Peter. Did the apostles, did Peter really shift their thinking as Jesus didn't visibly return right away?
Well, the argument presented in our sources is compelling. No, they didn't. A close look at 1 and 2 Peter suggests Peter consistently expected the fulfillment tied to Jerusalem's destruction. He wasn't explaining away a delay.
So who was he writing to?
He seems to be addressing Jewish scoffers, opponents who were denying God would intervene at all. They were saying everything just continues as it always has, denying even past judgments like Noah's flood.
So they weren't believers disappointed by delay, but skeptics denying any judgment was coming.
Exactly. That context is crucial.
And in 1 Peter, that sense of imminence feels strong. Appearing of Jesus Christ, revelation of Jesus Christ. It sounds very near term.
It does. And then 1 Peter 4.7 is incredibly direct. The end of all things is at hand. The Greek word there, angiken, means it has drawn near and remains near. It's not vaguely off in the future.
And the end of all things here means?
The end of the old covenant system, the temple, the Mosaic law's centrality. Not the end of the physical cosmos, but the end of that specific religious age. It aligns perfectly with Jesus' focus.
Then 1 Peter 4.1 to 7:18. For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. You mentioned house of God likely means the temple system.
Yes, judgment starting there. And that line, if the righteous scarcely be saved, it probably refers to the Christians having a narrow escape.
By fleeing Jerusalem like Jesus told them to in Mark 13.
Exactly. It fits the historical context of Christians escaping before the final siege. Peter also mentions the chief shepherd's imminent appearance in chapter 5. The expectation is consistent.
Okay, turning to 2 Peter 3. Peter says he's reminding them of the commandment of us, the apostles, so not new doctrine.
Correct.
Yeah.
He's reinforcing what they already knew. And he identifies those scoffers, again, people denying divine action, past or future. They're uniformitarians. Everything stays the same.
Right, and this is where we get that famous verse, 2 Peter 3.8. One day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, often used to explain delay.
And that's the common misreading. Peter isn't giving a math formula for calculating delay. He's quoting Psalm 90 to affirm God's transcendence. God isn't bound by our time, therefore his promises will be fulfilled. He's not slack, Peter says in the next verse, but long-suffering. Why? To allow time for repentance, for the gospel mission to be completed before that old order finally ended.
So the long-suffering wasn't about delaying a future second coming, but allowing time before the judgment on Jerusalem.
That's the argument. It fits the context of the imminent end of the Mosaic age.
And Peter remains certain. The day of the Lord will come as a thief. He talks about heavens passing away, elements melting. Again, symbolic.
Very likely symbolic of the dissolution of the old covenant system, its structures, its principles, elements, not necessarily the physical universe melting. And the result? New heavens and new earth, which Peter says they are looking for. This represents the new covenant order, characterized by righteousness, already breaking in through Christ.
So Peter is still actively expecting this day, even saying believers can hasten it through faithful living and gospel work.
Yes, the expectation remains active and urgent right to the end of his letters. He even points to Paul's writings as agreeing with him, showing this wasn't just Peter's view, but a shared apostolic understanding.
Okay, this is where it gets really powerful. Let's connect the dots directly to history. How did the Jewish War, 66 to 70 CE, confirm what Jesus predicted?
The connections are frankly stunning. The Abomination of Desolation. We discussed Josephus recording the Zealots defiling the temple in late 66 CE. That was the trigger sign.
And the flight of the Christians?
Eusebius, the church historian, explicitly records that the Jerusalem church received a divine warning before the siege began and fled across the Jordan to Pella. They obeyed Jesus' command and survived.
Incredible. And the Great Tribulation.
Josephus' eyewitness accounts of the siege, the factional fighting, the horrific famine, the Roman brutality, they match Jesus' description of unprecedented suffering perfectly.
What about the cosmic signs? Armies in the clouds, strange lights.
Both Josephus and Tacitus mention weird phenomena around that time. Strange lights over the temple, chariots and soldiers seen fighting in the clouds, a voice heard from the Holy of Holies saying, "We are departing." People at the time saw these as omens.
And that detail about the Roman siege engines?
Yes. Josephus describes the massive stones thrown by Roman catapults and how Jewish watchmen on the walls would shout warnings as they flew, sometimes yelling, "Ha, Batson, the sun is coming."
The sun cometh.
Or words to that effect. An incredible perhaps unintentional echo of Jesus' predicted coming in judgment via those very forces.
And the timing. Let's recap. All of it discourse around 33 CE.
Yes.
Abomination, the trigger, late 66 CE. That's 33 years.
But within a generation.
Great Tribulation, the siege, 6770 CE, about 3.5 years, 42 months.
Matching the prophetic time frame.
And the final destruction, 70 CE, all wrapped up within about 37 years of prophecy.
It falls squarely within the lifetime of Jesus' contemporaries. It fulfills "this generation shall not pass" precisely. The temple's fall was the definitive endpoint of the Mosaic Age, the full arrival of the New Covenant era.
So pulling this all together, what does this interpretation mean for you, the listener, today? It's a very different take on Mark 13 than many might be used to.
It suggests that the plain, straightforward reading of Mark 13 is actually the most historically accurate one. Jesus meant what he said to the people he said it to about events they would witness.
Right.
And history remarkably confirms it.
So those critics, Barclay, Russell, Fredrickson, Levine, even Lewis, in his concern, they read the text correctly about imminence.
Yes, they often understood what Jesus seemed to be saying, but they were wrong in their historical assessment that it didn't happen. The argument here is that it did happen, exactly as predicted.
And Peter's faith wasn't naive hope in something delayed.
Not at all. His unwavering expectation of imminent fulfillment was justified. He understood the scope and timing. As the summary puts it, Peter never needed to adjust his theology or accommodate delay because no delay occurred.
And the implications for Christian faith today seem huge.
They are. First, Jesus' prophetic reliability is strongly affirmed. It's powerful evidence for his divine insight. Second, it clarifies the nature of his kingdom spiritual, replacing the old system, God's presence no longer tied just to Jerusalem. Third, the principles remain urgent: watchfulness, faithfulness, readiness for God's purposes. And finally, it offers strong historical verification for the Bible's trustworthiness, showing prophecy aligning with recorded history.
It comes back to that verse, Mark 13:3-1. Jesus literally put his credibility on the line. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away.
And the historical fulfillment within that generation, as argued here, vindicates that claim. It establishes his reliability.
So rather than being an embarrassing verse, maybe Mark 13:30 and the whole Olivet Discourse is actually one of the strongest historical confirmations for Christianity. Proof that Jesus kept his word right down to the letter. Something to think about. If this passage, often seen as difficult or problematic, actually has such a precise historical fulfillment, what might that mean for how you approach other challenging parts of Scripture or history? It makes you wonder, doesn't it?